Hello everyone. Welcome to this video on embedding a dashboard in React with Node.js. In this tutorial, I will show you how to create an application from scratch, configure, and run it using Visual Studio Code. This integration provides a seamless experience for accessing and gaining real-time insights. It helps manage data and visualizations in a centralized environment, simplifying data handling, reducing the complexity of analysis, and improving business performance. I've provided a link to the documentation, which includes a sample application for your reference. Let's get started. I've already installed Node.js on my machine to create a React with Node.js application using Visual Studio Code. Next, I create a folder for the application and navigate to it. Within it, I create a folder named Client and navigate to it. Then I run this command to create the application. This creates a new React application with a basic project containing all the necessary files and dependencies in the client directory without creating an additional subdirectory. Next, I need to add an embed.config.json file to configure embedding parameters, authentication, user context, and customization for secure embedding of a dashboard. In the dashboard server, I click Settings, select Embed, and click Enable Embed Authentication. Then click Download. A dialog box will open. Select the Sales category in Sales Analysis Dashboard. Next, I download the JSON file and add it to the application's root folder. I open the application root folder in Visual Studio Code. I create a JS file named embed.js. In it, I add an API that sets up an Express server with cores, handles HTTP and HTTPS requests, parses URLs, manages file system operations, and performs cryptographic functions. I add cores to enable cross-origin resource sharing for all incoming requests and Express.json to parse incoming requests with JSON payloads. I set the port number for the server to listen. I add code to read and parse the configuration from embed.config.json. Then, I add an endpoint that generates a signed embed authorization URL using user and timestamp data, sends a GET request to the dashboard server, and returns the server's response to the client. I add the GetSignature URL query string that generates a base64 encoded HMAC SHA-256 signature using the embed secret and the provided query string, followed by the getData endpoint to serve selected embed configuration details from embed.config.json to the client. Lastly, add app.listen with the port number so the server can run. Next, I create a new file named package.json. I copy the code from the documentation and add it. Within it, I update the Bold BI embedded SDK to the current version number. This defines a Node.js as backend and React as frontend for this project, using Bold BI for integration. Next, I go to the client folder and open src. I create a folder named Dashboard. In it, I create a file, dashboard.js. This helps define mandatory properties and implement methods. Render dashboard, to render the dashboard, render to create the DOM elements, and component didMount to contact the server. To enable dashboard embedding functionality, I add imports, global styles, the React library, and the Bold BI embedding SDK. Then I set the API host URL for the Node.js running point. I add the URL of the Node.js backend's authorization server endpoint for values controller. I add the dashboard class component, which initializes state and creates a new Bold BI instance to manage embedded dashboards. Then I add the render dashboard function, which initializes and loads a Bold BI embedded dashboard using the provided configuration and authorization server URL. I add the render function, which returns the JSX structure containing a container div for displaying the embedded bold BI dashboard. Lastly, I add the component didMount function, which fetches the embedding configuration from the backend and renders the bold BI dashboard, handling errors if the config file is missing. Next, I open the app.js file. I replace the code by adding the necessary module import codes to define the app component. Then, I add the dashboard rendering component and export it for use in other files. Lastly, I open the index.js file. I copy the code from the documentation and replace it here. This imports the necessary modules, React and React DOM. It also imports the app component and uses React DOM render to render the app component into the specified HTML element. Now everything is ready to render the dashboard. I run this command. This installs all the required libraries for the application. Then, I run this command to build and run the application. On successful compilation, you'll see the sales analysis dashboard rendered automatically in your default browser. If you want to open the dashboard in design mode, change the view mode to Design and load dashboard to Load Designer in the dashboard.js. The application will automatically update and you'll see the dashboard load in design mode. In this video, I've shown you how to embed a dashboard in React with Node.js and Bold BI. If you found this video helpful, click the like button and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos like this. Thank you for watching.